Hello and welcome back to another episode of Becoming Relentless. I am your host, elenoa.mccabe. I'm an IFBB Bikini Pro and an online health and fitness coach. And today we are going to do a little Q&A. So I did one on my Instagram stories the other day, and I had a lot of really good questions, but I didn't have a chance to answer them. So screenshotted them, collected them up, and we're going to answer them today. So we'll just dive right in. Question number 1, how do I lose body fat without losing muscle? This is really important. I do think a lot of women don't understand, like when they have a weight loss goal, they're focused a lot on the scale and that number, but they don't really realize that what they should be trying to do is lose body fat, but keep as much muscle as possible. And that is because muscle is more metabolically active. So the more muscle that you have, the more calories that you burn at rest. So if you're chronically dieting, if you're not eating enough, and you're doing excessive amounts of activity, you're probably burning through your muscle. And what that's going to do is you're going to end up looking like a wet noodle. You're going to be skinny fat. You are not going to have the lean toned look that a lot of people go for. And I say lean and toned in quotes, because a lot of the time what I get from newer athletes or people who are just looking to lose weight, and they have an aesthetic goal, is they're oh, I want to look toned. Well, to be toned, you have to have muscle mass. And to have muscle mass, you have to strength train. And muscle doesn't just pop on. A lot of people think oh, if I lift too heavy, I'll be bulky, I'll look like a man. And that is just the worst thing that I've ever heard in my life. I have been training hard for almost 10 years now, and I would love to be bulky. I would love to have more muscle mass. So I can promise you it's not lifting heavy equals looking like a man. But you do have to lift heavy and progressively overload AKA lift a little bit more each time. And in order to build the muscle, in order to have that toned look that you're going for. When you're in a calorie deficit, it does become a little bit more likely that you could potentially lose muscle mass, which again is going to slow down your metabolism, and it isn't going to you're not going to end up looking the way that you want. And so why lifting weights is important for muscle preservation, especially in a deficit, is because as you lean out, if you are losing more body fat than you are muscle mass, having the defined look is just more probable. A really good way to make sure that when you are in a deficit, so let's say that you are trying to just lose fat and keep your muscle, what you're going to want to do is make sure that you're eating enough protein. And I think that, again, there's a lot of misconceptions around protein intake and what's adequate. But I'm always going to say 1 gram per pound of body weight is really good for protein. So let's say that we'll do average, right? You're 5'5" and 150 pounds and you want to lose weight. You should be eating 150 grams of protein per day. And I know that sounds like a lot, but if you can break that across 4 to 5 meals, it's really a lot more manageable. And you can also use things like protein powder. You can add egg whites into things. There are definitely sneaky ways to get that protein in, but making sure that you have enough protein so that you are supporting your muscle mass is going to be really important. Also, protein as a macronutrient, it is less likely to be stored as fat. So if you're eating an excessive amount of protein, it's not likely going to be stored as body fat, which is always a good thing. So whenever I have prep clients or whenever I have people who are trying to lose weight and they're super, super hungry, we'll raise their protein as much as their digestion can handle it, because protein's also kind of a harder macronutrient for your digestive system to break down. Not impossible, just a little bit harder. It would help to take digestive enzymes or make sure that your stomach acid is not low if you're going to increase your protein. That's a different story. We won't go into that before I get off on a tangent. But making sure that you are eating enough protein and having it be 1 gram per pound of body weight is going to be really important. And then when you are in a deficit, so I think a lot of the time we try to go 0 to 100. So if you're trying to lose body fat, a lot of people are oh, I'll just cut my calories and I'll do a ton of cardio. And that's not really going to work because your metabolism is adaptive. So if you are dieting really hard, your metabolism is going to start to downregulate because your body wants to stay in homeostasis. So trying to lose weight is kind of like, you want to do it in a way that is slow and steady, but also you want to see progress, right? So what I would suggest is entering like a moderate calorie deficit, like 300 to 500 calories per day of a deficit, and then giving yourself enough runway, enough time to see the accumulation and to see the results over time. So that's the other thing is I think you risk sacrificing muscle mass if the deficit is too large from the jump, because your body needs fuel. So your body's going to start breaking down muscle if you're not eating enough. And then the other half of this is obviously like output and activity. So if you go straight into a calorie deficit food wise, and then you also go straight into doing a ton of cardio, then your body is going to start pulling energy from your muscle. So that's why whenever you're starting a cut or you're going into a deficit and you want to keep your muscle mass, do slow and steady over time and just do one variable at a change at a time. So what I mean by that is like start with a calorie deficit. And if you're not doing any cardio, maybe do like 10 minutes a day, but start with that moderate calorie deficit, like minus 300 or 500 a day of a deficit for your calories, and then a little bit of cardio. And then maybe the next week, like you drop, okay, cool, keep doing what you're doing. Once you plateau, then you can do a little bit more cardio. So I always like to taper in and out and like exchange. I don't know if taper is the right word, but I don't like to change too many variables at once because then you don't know which one was responsible for which reaction. So personally, I like to start with, if somebody's calories are at a certain amount, I'll cut 20% of their carbs out, and that's the deficit for the first week. And then I'll add in cardio the next week, and then I'll play back and forth with those variables, like pulling from whichever ones I feel like are going to be most beneficial. But I guess the key here is like you don't have to starve yourself and overwork yourself to lose weight. If you want to do it in a sustainable manner, if you want to make sure that you are preserving the muscle mass that you've worked so hard to build, you need to do it in a way that your body's not going to start using the muscle. So slow and steady always wins the race. Using smart nutrition, prioritizing strength training, and then also a key that I think is kind of overlooked, but like your recovery and your sleep. I always talk about it, but I do think that sometimes people forget sleep is when your body has a chance to rest, recover, and repair. So especially if you are trying to build or maintain the muscle that you have and your strength training, you have to give your muscle rest because that's when the micro tears from lifting repair themselves. So getting adequate sleep, getting good recovery, prioritizing those things, that's also what's going to help you with keeping that muscle mass, but still losing weight. The second question was, how do I stop my emotional binge eating? And I know that I've touched on this before, but I get this question like almost every time in my Q&A, which just tells me like it's important to reiterate and keep talking about, because maybe one way that I explain it or say it like doesn't make sense, but maybe another way will like resonate with you. So what I did, or what I've talked about previously, especially with emotional eating and binge eating, was the HALT principle. And that basically is like assessing where you're at. So are you actually hungry? Are you angry? Are you lonely? Are you tired? And being able to identify what you're feeling before you go like self-soothe with food, that is going to be really important. But if you're already kind of in that cycle, like you already struggle with emotional binge eating, and I get it, like I have been there, especially in like post-show periods. When you're in prep, you get your dopamine from achievements, like you get your dopamine from hitting a new low or from breaking a cardio record or lifting like heavier weights. Like that's where you get your sense of satisfaction and dopamine from. Post-show, when you really are just like trying to get through the reverse and you're so hungry and you still feel weak and you're in that weird in-between phase, you start to get your dopamine from food. And so I think a lot of competitors, and even people who have just dieted really hard, they fall into this cycle because number one, they're getting their dopamine hits from food. And so then anytime they're feeling like an extreme emotional sensation or reaction, they will have that emotional eating like happen. I just like totally lost my train of thought mid-sentence. Sorry, guys. But I think the person who asked me this question, so she is a former competitor. And I think one of the most common threads is like, obviously after restrictive eating for a long time, which is what contest prep is, right? Like contest prep is restrictive. You have this sense of rebellion. Like you're like, okay, well, I just dieted for 6 months and I restricted myself so heavily that now I'm going to go in the complete opposite direction and I'm going to let myself eat whatever. And then you have like these feelings of guilt and shame and you get caught up in that cycle. That is like super common and something that I have also struggled with myself. And so understanding like how overly restricting leads you to that sense of like rebellion and that sense of loss of control, and then identifying your own triggers. So is it emotional? Is it environmental? Like what context do you feel like you lose control, or like what emotions are you feeling when you do start to turn to food? And just identifying that and understanding that like, oh, this is emotional versus physiological. That can also help you take a step in the right direction. I will always say, like, if you are struggling with this day in and day out, you need to reach out to a professional. And I don't mean a coach. Like, I don't mean an online bodybuilding coach. Most of us are not equipped to help people who are actually struggling with this eating disorder. I will say, like, post-show, I have experienced like this cycle myself, and I have athletes who I've helped work through it with them. But there's a fine line between like somebody being like, oh, I'm post-show and I'm just really hungry all the time and I'm struggling with overeating, versus somebody who is actually like emotionally binge eating. So also knowing the difference and having a coach who is willing to be honest with you and tell you when they're not equipped to handle that, that's also important, because I think sometimes coaches are just like, oh, suck it up, or like, oh, just stick to the plan. Why aren't you sticking to the plan? And they don't understand that there's like psychological and physiological factors that are coming in that you probably need like professional help with. And that's okay. It's okay to need professional help. That's what it's there for. And if you need a resource, Celeste, I've had her on the podcast, but Celeste Rains Turk, she is incredible. She has a lot of free resources on her website and on her Instagram. And then I think you can also book calls with her. And she's certified. She has degrees. Like, she's a certified counselor, and this is her specialty. So if you did need somebody, or you needed like a free resource or something, I highly recommend reaching out to her. This is like her wheelhouse. The third question. So how do you, somebody asked, how do I stop comparing myself to others in the gym or on social media? And I totally get this, because I think we all do this. Like, we all fall into the comparison trap. We're all human. And honestly, like, we're wired to compare things. Like, it's a biological function that has evolved through time. So what's that saying? It's like comparison is the thief of joy. That is like 100% true. Constant comparison, it's just so mentally and emotionally draining. And I think it's made really easy, especially with social media. Like, you can go on your phone and see 100 people who look literally perfect, who look way better than you, who will always look better than you. But you have to understand, like, what you see online isn't always the truth. Like, there are so many different factors, and maybe that person does look that good. Even then, it's not realistic or fair to yourself to hold yourself to that standard or to compare yourself to them. Recognizing that, like, it is a highlight reel. What you see online half the time, that's like one of 100 pictures that was like touched up. The lighting was perfect. This person probably like dieted for weeks to like get this certain look. Like, there's so many things behind the scenes, not to mention Photoshop, AI, all of these different ways that you can manipulate an image and like sneakily. I mean, there's so many ways that, I mean, I'm sure there's so many pictures that we scroll past every day that we don't even realize are doctored. Like, yeah, there's Facetune, and I know people use Facetune. I'm not naive to that, but you can kind of make the assumption that like 9 out of 10 people that you're seeing online have done something to that photo or posed in a way or had lighting in a way that was favorable, because people aren't going to post things that they don't think are a highlight, if that makes sense. So I think especially in the fitness industry, we run into comparison, and that comparison is just so mentally draining, and it does impact your self-esteem. It does impact like the way that your mental health is for that day. And so what I would recommend is, number one, like defining your own personal goals. So what are you trying to do? Like, what is your goal? And focus on that, like focus on that journey, because we all have goals. We all have things that we're striving for. You don't know what another person on social media's goal is. You don't know how long they've been in the industry or fitness. You don't know like what drugs they are or aren't taking. Like, you have no idea. So instead of putting your energy towards like, oh, I want to be like that girl or look like that girl or have X body part like that person, focusing on what you want to feel and what you want to achieve and putting your energy into your journey, it's going to take you much further than you wasting your time and energy looking at things online. Obviously, I know that it's easier said than done. And like, I for sure get caught in the doom scroll. Like, I've been there, but you also have to understand, again, it's all a highlight reel. Most of it is not 100% rooted in reality. Also, with that, limiting your exposure to certain things. So I'll tell you guys a secret. I have an Instagram, like it's a Finsta, but it's not under my name at all. And it has like a random picture of like food as the profile picture. But I use that Instagram to follow certain models or beauty pages or influencers that I don't want to actually see on my real Instagram. So my Noah McCabe, like that feed is very intentionally curated because I am in the fitness industry and I am a coach and I am an IFBB bikini pro. And so my feed is like very much tailored to those things. But if I'm not careful, certain posts and certain things will start to show up in my For You page, and it does affect me. And I know that. So what I did is I have a separate Instagram. Nobody's ever found it ever that I know, but it's like when I want to go look at like makeup tips, or when I want to go look at models and like try to see like, okay, how are they posing or how are they dressing? Or I want to look at the fashion and beauty industry. Like, I'll go on there for a little bit, but as soon as I notice myself being like mentally affected of like, oh, I wish my body looked like that, or I wish that I could wear makeup like that, or whatever it is, like I immediately will log out of it. But I think having that boundary and limiting your exposure, like knowing yourself enough to limit the exposure and being mindful of who you're looking at, what you're consuming, and what you're putting your energy towards, like that can be incredibly impactful and important. So if you are like for me, I'm probably walking a thin line. Like there's that temptation of like wanting to go on Instagram and like look at the models and whatever else. I know that about myself, but I also know how I can limit my exposure. And so for me, it works. Like I know some people, they're just like very intentional with how they curate their social media and it works well for them. So if you fall into that camp, like more power to you, love that for you. But if you do struggle with comparing yourself to other people, like what are you comparing yourself to? Look at who you're following on Instagram, what you're liking on Instagram or Facebook or TikTok or whatever it is, wherever it is that you feel like you are comparing and feeling inadequate, like do a self audit and unfollow, block, mute, whatever you have to do, because life is too freaking short for you to spend time on your phone scrolling, being sad and comparing yourself to things that like honestly probably aren't even real. Okay. 4th question. What is the best workout split for my goals? So I thought this question was funny because number 1, girl, I don't know your goals. But number 2, the words like best workout split, there's never going to be a best anything. Like if there was a best of something, everybody would be doing it and you would know, right? Like if there was a secret sauce, like a little tip, like the best exercise for XYZ, like we would all know and we would all be doing it because it would work. So get that idea of like a best out of your head. What really matters for a workout split is number one, what are your goals? So let's make up an example. Let's say you want to grow your shoulders. Okay, if your goal is to grow delts, you need to figure out what's the timeline. You need to figure out how do you measure that progress. And then the best workout split for you, and I say best in quotes, is going to be the one that causes the most growth for your delts, the one that causes the most stimulus. So what you'll want to do is design a program where you are training delts a certain amount of times, like frequency, certain amount of exercises, sets, the volume, all that good stuff. And then you stick with it, because there's no point in coming up with this like super intricate program if you can't follow it. And it also doesn't make sense if your goal is to grow delts that you're hitting glutes 3 times a week. So those things are what really matter. But if I'm being honest, the best workout split is the one that you're going to stick to and be consistent with over time. Because most people, they get bored. They'll do 6 weeks of a program, they won't see anything, and they're like, it's not working. It's not that it's not working, it's that you haven't put enough time and effort and consistency in. 6 weeks is not a lot of time for muscular growth. You want to see true muscle growth? Do the same program for 6 months, 12 months, and focus on getting better each time. And it doesn't have to be reps or weight. It can also be mind to muscle connection. It can be tempo, like how slow are you lifting the weights? How much time are you spending under tension? Those are the things that matter. And if this doesn't excite you and it actually overwhelms you, or you don't know what to do from here with this information, hire a coach. That's what they're for. They will take the thinking aspect out of it. You just have to communicate with me, what are your goals? And I will make your program, and it will be the best fit because you will be consistent with it over time and actually see the growth over time. So hopefully that makes sense. But if you're struggling in that area, girl, that's my job. Just hire me. All right, next question. And this one is super common. Why am I always tired even though I'm working out and I'm eating healthy? It doesn't make sense. All right. So most people experience chronic fatigue despite doing everything right. And this is for several reasons. It can be overtraining. It can be stress. It can be lack of recovery, or it could be underlying health issues. So we're going to break down each one, but some of them are a little bit more obvious than the others. Obviously with like overtraining, this one, I don't want to say it's rare, but in terms of like strength training, most women are not overtraining. Most women are doing a lot, but they're not overtraining in the sense that like they're shocking their central nervous system with heavy weights. Most people are doing too much in terms of like day-to-day stress and what they put on their plates. So a really good example of this, like overtraining, it also goes with lack of recovery, because if you're doing too much and then you're not recovering enough, then you're just kind of digging a hole. But a good example of this is actually me last year when I was in prep. I was also doing hot Pilates. I was doing hot yoga. I was going for really long walks outside in the heat. And I was trying, I thought, to like be effective and lose weight faster and like speed up the process. And what I was really doing was overworking my body and then under recovering. I was doing a lot of travel. I was doing the most, basically. And what happened was my body was not responding, was not happy. And also it caused health issues. So too much exercise without rest is actually very detrimental, especially for women. We are not small men. Our bodies are not the same. Men typically can work a lot harder on less sleep, and they're not as impacted health-wise. Women, we're not on a 24-hour cycle like with our hormones. We're not as resilient to being like worked into the ground. And I'm not saying that like men should overtrain and undersleep. Like I think that their health is just as important, but I will say that women's health is a little bit more sensitive, as in we often are doing way too much and not recovering enough, and we don't know it. We're just so used to it. So yeah, making sure that you aren't burning yourself out, you're not doing too much. That is going to be the first question that I ask. Like if you're like, oh, I'm working out and I'm eating healthy, but I'm not losing weight, or I'm really tired all of the time. Well, if you're really tired and you're having that chronic fatigue, your body's probably trying to tell you something. So listen. And a lot of us have this like underlying fear of, oh, if we're not doing anything, if we're not being productive, then we're not worthy, or like we're not going to achieve our goals. When really, you deserve rest. Like you deserve to take extra rest days, to not have to stress yourself out about getting all of this stuff done in a day. If you need to take 2 or 3 days off from working out because you're so tired, that is not a bad thing. It's never going to be a bad thing. I'm always telling my athletes, take the rest days. You need the rest. Like I would rather you take 2 or 3 rest days in a row so that you feel fresh and motivated and ready to like go hit the gym, then you just like push. And then all of a sudden you wonder why you hate the gym and you never want to go. So always take the rest. The next thing, what was it that we said? It was overtraining, stress, lack of recovery, underlying health issues. So the stress I kind of just talked about, but a lot of us don't realize like the impact of our day-to-day activities and how that is actually really stressful on us. Matt and I from Ryze, like he and I have done several podcasts. So if you haven't listened to those, go back and listen to me and Matt Cusano. He's the owner of Ryze HRT. He and I have talked about this a lot, but like modern day society is so stressful. Like if you commute to work, that's stress. Like you being in traffic, stress. You getting an email from your boss about a meeting or a deadline, stress. You have kids, stress, lots of stress. All of these things, like they add up. And even though we're used to it and we don't notice it, like it's not in our conscious awareness, our body is still having physical reactions, chemical reactions to all of these things in our day. So if they're building up over time and we don't give ourselves adequate rest and recovery, then at some point you are going to see the consequences. And a lot of the time it manifests itself as health issues or chronic fatigue. Like you never quite feel like you're well rested or energized, or that you have motivation to get through the day. You're just always tired. So what I would do is make sure that you are prioritizing rest days or time to yourself or proper sleep and recovery. Get as much sleep as you possibly can. We need 7 to 9 hours. Women usually need more than that. Like, well, not more than 9 hours, but like 8 to 9 hours. And so if you feel like you're always tired, but you're living the healthy lifestyle, like take a look at your stress, take a look at if you're doing too much, and build in a little bit more recovery and rest time for yourself. Now, if those are all like, you're like, no, I take my rest days, like I'm a vegetable on the couch on my rest days and I'm still tired, then the next thing I would look at is your nutrition, your vitamins. Like, are you deficient in any micronutrients? Are you eating enough? Not getting enough iron, not getting enough B12, not getting enough magnesium. Those are the things that I would look at next, and just make sure that those are in line and they're not deficient at all, because those impact your energy. After that, like that's like the low hanging fruit, right? Like that's something that we all have control over. It's free to figure out if you're stressed or if you're eating enough or if you're getting enough vitamins. The next things I would look at would be your hormones and your gut health. And I would say that those are like a deeper level. They're not like low hanging fruit necessarily, because in order to figure out if your hormones or your gut health is off, you have to do testing. And I'm going to be blunt and direct. If you are getting your hormone advice from an influencer online or from an online coach online who says, here are 3 ways you can balance your hormones, stop. Don't do that, because half of the time these online coaches are going into ChatGPT and they're asking, what is content that I can create around hormonal balance for women? They don't know your body. They don't know what's happening internally. You don't even know. You might have these symptoms of like, oh, I'm always tired. Well, being always tired can come down to so many different things. It doesn't automatically mean that like you have a cortisol issue. And so it literally drives me nuts when I see this, because it's so misleading and it's so dangerous. You have to test to figure out what is going on internally. You cannot self-diagnose off of a reel or a post. So now that we've got that out of the way, I'm not going to rant about it, but you need to make sure that you are getting your blood work done, get a panel drawn, actually test, and don't just self-diagnose off of Instagram and social media. But if you do feel like you're eating healthy, you are exercising, you're getting adequate sleep, all of these boxes that I've talked about, you're doing all those things and you still feel chronic fatigue, get some sort of lab work done. Look at your cortisol, your thyroid, and your sex hormones. Make sure that those are all good. Chances are, if those are off, you may also have a gut issue. The reason why is because GI and hormones, they go hand in hand because a lot of our hormones are processed in our gut. And if you're having a conversion issue, so let's say your thyroid's not functioning properly, or you have high cortisol, or your sex hormones are off in some way, it could be because something in your gut is not being processed properly. A lot of the time, what I've seen in my athletes' blood work is if they have downregulated thyroid or there's a conversion issue from T3 to T4, it's because they have an underlying GI issue. But again, that's not something that I can just diagnose off of them feeling tired. I have to look at their blood work or I have to look at their GI map. So that testing would be like a deeper level of getting to the root. And then, well, that would be like the deepest level, I guess. And then the next thing would be working with a professional. So again, I'm all for continued education, and I'm not going to lie, I'm really good at reading blood work and I'm really good at understanding underlying health conditions, but I'm also really good at understanding that I'm not a doctor and some things are completely out of my scope. So I partner with Ryze HRT. They're a clinic. They do blood work for athletes. They don't just do hormone replacement therapy. They also do testing, like blood work testing. They do GI maps. They do Dutch testing, cortisol, saliva. They do the whole 9 yards. They have physicians on staff. They have free consult calls. So if you are curious and you feel like some of these things that I've talked about are resonating with you and you want to get testing done, usually your PCP or your general doctor isn't going to order all of this lab work because they need something to be wrong. And chronic fatigue isn't necessarily something that they're going to say, yeah, let's pull a full panel for your chronic fatigue. They're going to ask you if you're sleeping well, if you're drinking enough water. So if you need a resource, you can DM me. I have that. I can send you a link. And then, like, full disclosure, I also have a discount code. So if you want to get blood work done, or if you want to get supplements, or you end up working with Ryze and their physicians that they have on staff, I have discount codes to help you save money in whatever you need. A last question before we wrap up, because I know that I've been talking y'all's ear off. Somebody asked, how do you balance fitness with your social life and still make progress? And I did answer this on my Instagram, but I wanted to answer it long form on the podcast too, because I don't balance everything. I never have. I don't know how to. And I think that just you have to understand balance. It looks different for everybody. It's going to be different in every season. And how you define it is going to be up to you as the individual. So for me personally, I have different seasons. I love to work. I am probably a workaholic. I'm very goal oriented. I know that about myself. So when it comes to balance, I struggle. I struggle with knowing when is too much of one thing or not enough of another thing. And often I have to get external feedback, AKA from my family and friends, to understand like, oh, I'm overreaching, or I'm doing something like that's out of balance, right? But for me personally, I know that it's seasons. So when I'm in prep, when I'm working towards a show, or I have that sort of tangible goal in front of me, all of my efforts going towards that one thing. And the other, like, non-negotiables in my life, I attend to, but not to the level of detail or like as much as I do to like the goal in front of me, right? So you have to decide for yourself, what does balance look like to you? What are you okay with sacrificing, and what is non-negotiable to you? And what are you trying to achieve? Because for me, I don't want to get to the end of my life and look back and be like, oh, I didn't try. Like, I didn't try hard at this thing. I'm always going to put 110% into what is in front of me as far as goals. And I am okay with that. Like, I am okay knowing that I'm putting 110% effort into this thing, and that, hey, I might not be able to go out with my friends and do this activity, or I might not be able to participate in this event this weekend because I would rather work and I would rather do this thing instead. And I've come to peace with that. Like, I think a lot of people who ask questions like this of balancing fitness and social life and still wanting to see progress, you have to be okay with the sacrifices you're making. So if you don't want to sacrifice your social life, but you still want to achieve your fitness goals, you can do that. Just understand it's going to take longer. It's the results that you're looking for aren't going to just magically appear overnight, but they're not also going to just appear like 6 months down the line with just doing the same thing over and over. So it comes down to like, what are you willing to balance? Like, what is important to you? And only you can answer that question. I can give you like all of the tips and tricks of like balance and like time management and X, Y, and Z. But again, like, it's your life, and figuring out what that looks like for you. That's what's important. That's what matters. So I think shifting your focus to what is the long-term goal? What are you trying to achieve? And in the long term, what are you willing to sacrifice and what are you not? And again, like, only you can come up with that, and your balance is going to look so different than somebody else's. And that's okay. You don't have to have the same life as somebody else. You don't have to balance things the same way as everybody else. It's okay to be different, and it's okay to have your own definition of balance. If balance to you means you go to your 8 to 5 and you party on the weekends and you go to the gym here and there and you're okay with that, that is your sense of balance, dude, that's amazing. That is your balance. And it doesn't matter what other people say or do, right? So I think personally, there's always going to be different definitions, but I also think the idea that like you have to sacrifice your fun in order to achieve fitness is also not true. Like, you can have fun and still achieve your fitness goals. You just have to understand that like sometimes you're going to have to say no, or you're going to have to adjust and be okay with like compromise or coordinating different things. So like, for example, I guess like I could like tie it to something tangible. Like, for example, if you have a fitness goal to lose weight for summer, but you and your girlfriends always go out to like Sunday brunch, well, that's a really fun activity, but you don't have to all of a sudden be like, I'm not going to Sunday brunch until summer because I'm trying to be skinny or whatever it is. You can go to Sunday brunch, just like change what you order, or don't drink alcohol, or have something in moderation, split a dish with somebody else. Like, there's so many different ways that you can make progress and make tiny steps and changes in your fitness towards your goals without sacrificing the fun. So I think just getting creative, allowing yourself to think of different ways where you can participate and still work towards what you're trying to achieve, like, that is how you'll find your balance. But I'm probably not the best person to ask about balance, because my sense of balance is going to be very different than other people's. But with that, I'm going to get off my freaking soapbox for the day. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode. I know that there was a lot of different questions. There's like 6 questions and they're all kind of different. But if any of them resonated, let me know. I would love to hear the questions that you liked, or if you disagree with something that I said, I would love to hear that too. Like, I always want to hear feedback. So if you guys have any questions, comments, you want to talk about anything, you can hit me up on Instagram. As always, I really, really appreciate you guys tuning in. It helps the podcast a lot. If you could share, like, comment, subscribe, send it to a friend, that would be helpful as well. But I hope that y'all are having a great February, and I look forward to talking to y'all in the next episode. So until then, stay relentless.